In the year 1324, a man left West Africa with so much gold that he accidentally broke the economy of 3 continents. His name was Mansa Musa, ruler of the Mali Empire, and his journey to Mecca would become the single most talked-about event of the medieval world. Merchants in Cairo would still be recovering from his visit a decade later. Cartographers in Europe would begin drawing his image on maps they had never seen before. And historians today believe he may have been, by any measure ever devised, the wealthiest human being who has ever lived. To understand how one man could carry that kind of weight, we need to travel back to the Western Sudan, to a civilization that most of the world had simply forgotten to notice. The Mali Empire in the early 14th century stretched across nearly 2 million square kilometers. It controlled the upper Niger River Valley, the fertile floodplains that fed millions, and crucially, the vast goldfields of Bambuck and Bure, regions so rich in the precious metal that the soil itself seemed to glitter. Salt moved south from the Sahara in enormous caravans, and gold moved north in return. At the crossroads of these two flows sat the cities of Timbuktu, Janai, and Niani, places of scholarship, commerce, and extraordinary sophistication. Mansa Musa came to the throne of this empire around 1312, inheriting a kingdom built on the foundations laid by Sundiata Keita, the legendary founder whose story is still sung by griots across West Africa today. But Musa did not simply inherit greatness, he expanded it. Under his reign, the Mali Empire reached its greatest territorial extent. He was, by the standards of his age, a supreme sovereign, and he was a devout Muslim, a faith that had taken deep root in the Sahel region through centuries of trans-Saharan trade and scholarly exchange. For a Muslim ruler of his stature, the obligation of Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, was not merely religious duty. It was a declaration to the world of who he was. The preparations alone were staggering. Contemporary Arab chroniclers, including the Egyptian historian al-Makrizi, recorded details that still seem almost impossible to believe. Mansa Musa assembled a caravan of approximately 60,000 people. Some sources push that figure even higher, though historians approach the precise numbers with caution, noting that medieval chroniclers were not above exaggeration when confronted with spectacle. What is beyond dispute is that the procession was enormous, stretching for miles across the Saharan landscape. There were soldiers, servants, scholars, and officials. There were 12,000 enslaved people, a painful reminder that the wealth of this empire was built, like so many empires before and after, on systems of coercion that no modern conscience can admire. And there was gold, 80 to 100 camels, each carrying approximately 300 pounds of gold dust. The total has been estimated in the hundreds of billions of modern dollars, though economists remind us that such comparisons are inherently imperfect. The route took the caravan first north and east through the Sahara, a journey of weeks across one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. The desert crossing alone was a feat of logistics that would challenge a modern military. Water had to be carried or found at widely spaced oases. Food had to be preserved and distributed across a moving city of tens of thousands. Animals died, people died, yet the caravan pressed on, guided by experienced traders who had made this crossing for generations, following routes as old as civilization itself. When Mansa Musa arrived in Cairo in July of 1324, the city was the largest and most cosmopolitan in the Islamic world, a center of art, learning, and commerce that humbled almost everything it encountered. Almost. The Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, Al-Nasir Muhammad, received Musa with all appropriate ceremony, but it was Cairo's population that truly experienced the arrival. Musa distributed gold with breathtaking generosity, giving it to officials, scholars, and the poor alike. His entourage spent and gave away so much gold so quickly that the metal's value in Egypt collapsed. The price of gold in Cairo dropped by as much as 25%, and, according to al-Makrizi, did not fully recover for 12 years. A single act of generosity had destabilized the regional economy for over a decade. It is one of the most remarkable examples of unintended economic consequences in recorded history. From Cairo, the pilgrimage continued to the Hejaz, the sacred region of Western Arabia that holds both Mecca and Medina. The journey across the Red Sea and into the heart of the Arabian Peninsula brought Mansa Musa to the culmination of his spiritual purpose. The Hajj itself, the rituals that have drawn Muslims to these places for 14 centuries, was the center around which his entire journey had orbited. Historians believe he performed the pilgrimage with deep personal devotion, and his time in the holy cities left lasting impressions on those who witnessed the grandeur of his retinue. It was on this journey, in both directions, that Musa encountered a man who would shape his legacy in stone. Abu Ishaq al-Sahili was an Andalusian poet and architect from Granada, a man of refined learning who had made his own way to the Hejaz. The two men formed a connection that historians describe as one of the great cross-cultural encounters of the medieval world. Musa invited al-Sahili to return with him to Mali, offering compensation so generous that the architect agreed. What al-Sahili built when he arrived would transform the skyline of the Western Sudan forever. The return journey began the long arc back across the desert, back through Cairo, where Musa reportedly attempted to compensate for the economic damage his generosity had caused by borrowing gold back at interest, an account recorded by Egyptian sources with some bemusement. The caravan retraced its path through the Sahara, depleted now of the vast golden load it had carried eastward, but returning with something perhaps more durable: knowledge, connections, and the architect who would change everything. Back in Mali, al-Sahili set to work. The mosque he designed and built at Timbuktu, known as the Jingreba Mosque, still stands today. Its earthen walls and distinctive protruding wooden beams represent a style of Sudano-Sahelian architecture that became the visual language of West African Islam for centuries. Musa also commissioned the construction of a palace, mosques in other cities, and invested heavily in the scholarly infrastructure of Timbuktu. Under his patronage, the city grew into one of the great centers of Islamic learning in the medieval world. Historians estimate that at its peak, Timbuktu hosted between 25 and 50,000 students and contained libraries holding hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Some of those manuscripts survive to this day, preserved against extraordinary odds by families who hid them during centuries of conflict and conquest. The pilgrimage also had a consequence that Mansa Musa could not have anticipated. It made him famous in Europe. Word of the Mali king's wealth filtered north through North Africa and across the Mediterranean. By 1375, the Catalan Atlas, one of the most important European maps of the medieval period, depicted a figure in the Western Sudan seated on a golden throne, holding a golden orb, his image dominant over the continent. The cartographers had never met him. They had simply heard the stories and understood, even from that distance, that this was a ruler of incomprehensible resources. For centuries, European imaginations would be fired by tales of West African gold, a fascination that would eventually and tragically fuel the devastating transatlantic slave trade. The legacy of Mansa Musa's fame, like the man himself, cast shadows as well as light. Musa returned to his capital and continued to rule for roughly another decade. The exact date of his death is uncertain, with different sources suggesting dates between 1332 and 1337. What is certain is that the empire he left behind was the largest and most powerful in West African history, a civilization that traded across 3 continents, produced scholars of global influence, and demonstrated that the medieval world was far more interconnected, far more sophisticated, and far more diverse than the standard histories taught in many Western schools have ever acknowledged. The story of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage is not simply the story of a very rich man taking a very long trip. It is the story of a world in motion. It is the story of gold and faith, of architecture and economics, of a caravan that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Arab world and, by chain reaction, to Europe itself. It is the story of how a single journey could reshape trade routes, destabilize markets, inspire cartographers, and build monuments that stand 7 centuries later. And it is a reminder that when we speak of the great civilizations of the medieval world, the story is incomplete, fundamentally and embarrassingly incomplete, without the empires of West Africa standing at its center. If you found this journey through history fascinating, there are many more stories waiting for you on this channel.